Boker Tov, good morning on this fine Sunday morning, and I will admit that I'm being a little bit or sort of borderline mischievous a little bit today with today's title, in the sense that titles are always meant to be somewhat of a clickbait. Today's title is a little bit more clickbait, so that we can get you to study a little bit of Torah. So it's a bit of a shameless attempt to get you to study Torah. So please forgive me for that. Although we will give a little thought based on a Chinese sort of saying. But first, I forgot that a couple of weeks ago, a while back, we decided that we're going to start every single class with a mitzvah, with doing some tzedakah. So if you have a pushka around your house, take a pushka, put in some tzedakah. It is a wonderful mitzvah. And mentioned in this week's Torah portion, we also begin with another mitzvah. We're going to say a bracha, a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bidvaro. I hope you answered amen. And even better, I hope you have your own coffee so that we could sit down and we could learn. Today, actually, we're going to study with a little bit more meat, I think. Sometimes it's a little more just ideas, I guess. I don't want to say. And sometimes a little bit. Today we'll actually go through a little bit of some of the verses of the portions that we just learned. And yes, I will connect it a little bit with the Chinese balloon. So, that the China balloon and what we shot down, and all the jokes and memes that come with all the other shoot downs. Today we live in a world that blurs the seriousness of something and its humor and so on. Hopefully we have serious people that are sort of monitoring and dealing with this, not just on a meme level, but on a real level. But the Chinese, or China, reminds us, of course, of what the Mishnah says, that there's an ayin ro'eh, there's an eye that sees. There's an eye that sees all that is going on. I remember as a youngster, as a child, there was a radio show in New York called WEVD. Give us a thumbs up if you remember that Jewish station. That is when basically all you could listen to was radio, or if you had a record player at home, which we did, and that was what the entertainment was in terms of audio. So there was a WEVD, which probably still exists in New York as a channel, I would assume, but there was a host. His name was Art Raymond. Remember Art Raymond? Art Raymond was a definitely interesting fellow, and he was the host of the show that played music, Jewish music, all types of Jewish music, cantorial, the Barry Sisters, more up-to-date music at that time. And he was an interesting character. And I remember him saying something, as we just sitting and listening, and the radio's in the background. And I remember him there was I'm not sure which Holocaust movie or TV show was airing at the time, and he sort of expressed himself, and he said an expression which is really heretical, but I don't think he meant it in that way. He said, if only God would watch the TV show. So, there's an ayin roya. The Mishnah says there is a eye that sees, of course, everything that we do at every single moment. We think talking about the Chinese balloon. We think we live in a time where you would think, we rely on the U.S. Army and intelligence, where everything is secure. And every so often we are given reminders that that we still, and not only still, but we highly need to turn and daven and pray to Hashem to protect us. Even the most modern of technologies can be penetrated, and so that's a reminder that we need to always keep and remember in terms of false both physical security and spiritual security. So that's just by way of somewhat of an introduction, but as a lead into the Parsha discussion that we're going to have today is the following. There's a saying that the Chinese are, as we know, that's in some ways that's the sort of new possible superpower that is our competition. That's maybe a threat, maybe not. This is not a sort of political or geopolitical analysis. And one of the successes of China is said to be the fact that the Chinese have a simple secret that makes them so successful, which is that during work hours, they actually work. So that's a saying. And but I want to take that could be taken in two ways. There is a saying that the saying that during work hours they work, but perhaps we also have to take another lesson that during non-work hours they don't work. And let me just get into this a little bit more in detail. So this past week we read Parshas Mishpatim yesterday. So I want to share a little bit. I want to learn inside, the text inside, because Sunday morning is not about a quickie. It's about actually doing this a little bit learning. So in Parshat Mishpatim, the Parsha, the Torah begins over here with the verse, Ve'ela HaMishpatim, and these are the laws or the rational laws, Asher Tasim Lifneihem, you should place before them. This is the opening of this week's Torah portion, which comes following last week's Torah portion, where God gave us the 10 Commandments, the Torah. And over here it says, Ve'ela HaMishpatim, and these are the laws, and it goes on to tell us a bunch of, or many, tort law and laws of damage and man between man, you shouldn't steal, etc., is recorded in this week's parsha. And the Torah begins with Ve'ela, and these are the laws, and Rashi tells us to teach us that not only are the 10 Commandments given to us at Sinai, but even all these rational laws. You shouldn't lie, midvar sheker tirchak, and all that, which you would think are human rational laws that Moshe would maybe share with his people. You should know that it's also from Sinai. They're all godly laws. And the first law that God tells Moses to tell the Jewish people after this highest experience at Mount Sinai, you would think that maybe the laws should be about the davening, about praying, the mitzvah of studying Torah, these lofty laws. And it begins with the most basic laws, including the first law is the verse that I'm about to read in Hebrew, and then we'll translate. Ki tikne eved ivri, if you will purchase a eved ivri, a Hebrew slave, sheishanim yavod, he should work for you for 6 years, ubashvit, and on the 7th year, yetze lachov shechinam, he should go out to freedom. And the Torah goes on to give us some specific laws, specific details regarding this mitzvah of purchasing a Jewish slave. Now, under what circumstances, slavery, especially the Torah, is relevant to us today? You would think slavery is a big no-no. What relevance does this mitzvah have for us today? Now, just to give a little context, slavery, this slave is talking about somebody who became so poor that he couldn't afford his bills. and therefore he sold himself into slavery so that he can go ahead and pay for his bills, his family bills, and so on. And so therefore this mitzvah, or this option of slavery exists in the Torah, with very clear guidelines of how, especially once you get to the Talmud, of how you must treat your slave. It's not what we think is sort of the typical slave image that we have. Now, very clear laws of dignity and respect, and care that the master, in fact, the Talmud uses the expression kol hakone eved kekone adon latzmo, by purchasing a slave, or is like you're purchasing a master for yourself, because there are some serious responsibilities that you have to take upon yourself. But the question is, why this particular law is the first law that the Torah is telling us after this lofty experience of Mount Sinai? So I want to semi-digress by just sharing a couple of interesting things here from some of the commentaries, and also from Kabbalists and so on. Just as I said in the beginning, to give us a little meat on this pasuk, on this verse of the Torah. So the Torah, as I mentioned to you, goes on to tell us that if you purchase a slave, which is talking about somebody who sold himself, Shei Shanim Yavod, he's going to work for you for 6 years, because since this is not about sort of permanent, creating a permanent class of slaves, which has usually been the case in society, that there was a permanent, especially then, 3,500 years ago, there was zero hesitancy of having a slave. It was just totally part of life. But the Torah immediately, think about this, 3,500 years ago, says, no, we do not want a slave mentality. We don't want a slave class. You could be a slave. You're there because you've come upon a dire situation where you literally can't put food on the table, which, thank God for us living in a time of abundance, for the most part, none of us can even imagine that. The Torah says, slave for 6 years. 6 years. On the 7th year, he must go out to freedom. Vashvius yetze lachavshi chinam. On the 7th year, he goes out chinam. Chinam, no pay, meaning he doesn't have to pay to earn his freedom. You have to release him. Okay? So this is the law. But again, why is this what's being discussed over here? Now, Kabbalists, I'll give you for an example. The Zohar touches upon, and the Arizal touches upon the fact that this also is a spiritual law, and the reason why there are 6 years, and on the 7th year you go out freedom, because this sort of matches and corresponds to the 6 days of the week, and the 7th day you're free, which means, again, to get a little bit more Hasidic or Kabbalistic, is we know that there is Shiva Midos, there are 7 emotional soul characteristics, which is Chesed. I'll say it just in Hebrew: Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus is number 7, and the 6 years corresponds to the self-perfection of perfecting and refining your 6 emotional different characteristics of your soul. And that's why during these 6 years you're a slave, because since you haven't yet perfected yourself to the best, so you're still sort of a slave to forces which are not, to forces or part of your personality which is not properly refined. So it makes you a slave. Once you refine these 6 characteristics, then you reach Malchut, which represents Shabbat, and you become truly internally free. That's somewhat on a bit of a Kabbalistic level, based on what the Zohar says, and I believe the Arizal as well. I also mentioning over here, hold on a second, bear with me, some of the other things that I saw. Let me just look very, very quickly. Ein minute. Okay, we'll suffice with that. Okay? The Seder. Okay, so put this Chumash aside for a moment. Now let's carry on. This week is also the week when we will, God willing, say we will be celebrating Rosh Chodesh Adar. Yesterday we blessed the new month. We will be celebrating Chodesh Adar, which is the month in which we celebrate Purim. The Talmud tells us, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha. When you enter Adar, we increase in joy. We increase in joy. So it's a joyous month that's coming up. Now, joy is something that's very nice and very wonderful, but how does one get there? How does one get to a state of joy? I want to point out one more verse, and then we're going to try to tie this all together, okay? Later on in the parsha of this past week, let me try to find it. We read another verse. I think I might have missed it already. In the notes, bear with me. We read like this. Oh, here we go. This is again in Parshat Mishpatim. In this week's portion, we read the following. It says, Im kesef talve es ami. If you will borrow money to Im kesef talves ami, if you will borrow money to my nation, who specifically as ha'oni imach, the oni, the poor person that is with you, losia le'kanosha, you should not be somebody who is on his case, so to speak, who nudges him, who bothers him, if you know he doesn't have the money to pay back. And also, you shouldn't borrow to him or lend him actually with interest, right? Okay, so that's the verse. Im kesef. Where's my English chumash? Here's my English chumash. Hold on a second. Let me get my English translation so I could translate this right. A minute. Bear with me. There's a lot of beautiful stuff over here. Really beautiful stuff. Okay, so here, Zokter Azoy. Here's the English, and this is chapter 22, and it is verse 24. Chapter 22, verse 24. Here we go. Right, so here's the actual translation from a Chumash. When you lend money to my people, the poor person who is with you. Okay? So here also, first I want to give you a little bit of sort of meat, and then we will, again, bring it all together. Im kesef talves ami. This seems like a long worded, this seems like unnecessary words. Im kesef talve, im kesef, if money you will loan, es ami, to my people, es ha'oni, to the poor person, imach, with you, then lo tia lo kenosha, you should not be to him, lo tia lo kenosha, if you know he cannot yet repay your loan, do not behave towards him as a lender. You know, it's claiming your money forcibly. So it's so beautiful that in the nuances that the Torah, that God uses, there's so many commentaries on the verses of the Torah, because Hashem wrote the Torah in a cryptic, godly way, and there's so many insights that different commentaries over the years have given, which are just, beautiful to see it in the words itself. So Rashi over here says like this: Im kesef talve, if. So says Rashi, sometimes the word if, he brings from Rabbi Yishmael for the Talmud, that not always when we say if, doesn't mean if, it means when. Im kesef talve, says Rashi, in this case over here it means when. When you will loan money. When you loan money, says Rashi, es ami, es ani imach. What does this mean, says Rashi? It's actually, the Torah is trying to teach us an order of priority when you are asked to have money. Who comes first? Who comes second? So as Rashi says over here, Es Ani, he says like this, Es Ami, he says first, your first obligation is to go ahead and give a loan to Es Ami, people of your own people, because they depend on you, they come first. You have an obligation to anybody, but if there are two people who are come before you, Ami, your nation comes first. Number two, he says, Ani v'asher, if there's a loan that is either a poor person is asking you for a loan, a pauper is asking for a loan, or a rich person, es ha'ani, the person who is in a state of poverty comes first. Then he says like this, Aniya ircha, v'aniya echeres, if it's a poor person, someone in poverty that's from your city, your town versus from a different town, that's why it says in the verse, es ha'ani imach, the ani which is with you. Okay? And so he's saying that is the order. The Torah uses these words to give you the order of who comes first, who comes next. There's a beautiful Or HaChaim over here, Or HaChaim HaKadosh, Chaim Ben Atar. And I mentioned this, I believe, last week when we were at this portion. But it's very, very beautiful. And I want to share it again. I think I'm even going to share some of his words in Hebrew and then translate. He says like this, Im kesef, if money. Now we just said that Rashi tells us that im kesef, right? Im kesef. By the way, in my excitement, I'll digress for a second. Ibn Ezra over here says that why is es ami es ha'ani, my people, the poor person? Again, if you have the verse open in front of you, it'll be easier to follow a little bit over here. If money you will give as a loan to my people, to the poor, Ibn Ezra says that the poor are considered my people. It doesn't just mean the poor from within my nation. God is also, in the beautiful wording, choice of words, is also alluding to the fact that it is the poor specifically that God refers to as my people. Why? Why? So he says an interesting thing. Not interesting, he says a beautiful thing. He says like this. I'm using his words. Ki ha'ani, because the poor person, Kimoi hager va'yosam, just like the convert and the yasom and the orphan and almoda and the widow, v'koro hanim ami, Hashem refers to these as my people. So this is the words of the famous Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra. It's like this, ki ha-chasidim, people who are chasidim. Chasidim over here doesn't mean a group called chasidim. Chasidim means those who are more pious. Those who are more pious, those who go beyond the letter of the law, lo yivakshu osher ba'olam hazeh. They do not look for wealth in this world. So that's why Hashem refers to these people as my people, because it is the people who do not run after money that God says, these are my nation, my people. That's a little diversion to the Ibn Ezra. But I want to go get here to the Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim says a beautiful thing. This is what the Or HaChaim says, the famous Or HaChaim HaKadosh, who is buried, he was interred on Mount Olives in Jerusalem. The Or HaChaim says the following. He says like this. He says, why does it say, we ask, why does it say im kesef talva? Which more literally means if money you will loan to my people. And Rashi has to quote Rabbi Yishmael that says that im over here doesn't mean if, but it's a mitzvah. It's not an if, it's but when. Because it's a mitzvah to borrow, it's not just a choice. So the Or HaChaim says, im kesef. Why does the Torah choose the word im kesef, if money? To teach us the following. Im kesef, if a person finds himself that all of a sudden he has excess money, God has blessed him with excess money, what is the reason why God gave you that excess money? Talves ami, so that you could do a mitzvah and give a loan to someone else who needs it. That's what the Torah is hinting to. Rashi is more what's known as a pashtan. He explains the more literal level of Torah. Or HaChaim usually gives us a little bit beyond that. And they're both true. They're both correct. On a more literal level, im kesef means a mitzvah, you got to do it. But Orach Chaim says it's also alluding to the reason why the Torah here chose this specific wording is to tell you, im kesef, kama, if you have excess money, talves ami. Why? Esa'ani imach. We said, why all these extra words? The verse could have been so short. Kesef talve, right? Kesef talves ani. Give money to the poor, loan money to the poor. Im kesef talve, if money you should loan to my people, to the poor person, imach who is with you. And by the way, on the imach who is with you, Rashi also says an insight over there. Have a mistakel ba'atzmacha ki ilu ata'ani. When you are giving the poor person, you should, what does it say? Es ha'ani, the poor person, imach with you, to teach you that you should view yourself like you yourself are poor. Rashi doesn't say why you should view yourself as you yourself are poor. Why should you view yourself? Ki ilu ata ha'ani. Now, it means, again, as Rashi is usually not too esoteric, it's meant to be taken as at face value. As ha'ani imach, you should look at yourself, ki ilu ata ha'ani, knows, try to understand where he's coming from. There's a known story with a known sort of anecdote. Chaim. With a rabbi who used to always make an appeal for the food fund on Yom Kippur right before Ne'ilah. Right before Ne'ilah is when he would make the appeal for the food fund. Why? He would say, exactly the way you feel now on Yom Kippur after fasting for almost 25 hours. You're hungry. You have no food. This is the way the poor people here in the community feel every single day of the year. So now is the time to make your decision to give for the food, the charitable fund, and so on. So, es ha'ani imach, says Rashi, when you're giving charity, how should you give out charity? Consider yourself like you are the poor. However, let's get back to the Orach Chaim. The Orach Chaim says like this, something very beautiful. He says, im kesef, if you have money, and you might ask yourself, why do I have money? Why do I have money? Right? And then he goes a little further. He says like this. He says, you should know like this. You could ask also the other question. You could ask the question, why is it that you have excess money? What did you earn? What do you deserve to have excess money? You're more righteous than somebody else. You're more deserving. And he uses the expression, even Jacob, our forefather, Yaakov Avinu, the holiest of the holy. All he asked from God is when he was leaving his parents' home and he's traveling to Haran, all he asks from God is, give me beged lilbosh, give me clothing, give me food. That's all I need. I need clothing, I need shelter. What else do I need? He doesn't ask for wealth. So why, you might ask yourself, why am I deserving to have wealth? And on the flip side, on the other side, you might ask yourself, why would God not provide? God in his kindness, in his loving kindness, why would he not provide the poor person, the evyon, the ani? Why wouldn't he provide that person for his basic needs? And this question is already addressed in the Talmud and in other places, right? So the Even Ezra says, the Orach Chaim says like this. He says, when God creates a human being, every human being is given his lot and share of what he needs for his entire life, all his needs. It happens, this is what he says, sometimes, for whatever reason, Hashem has made it so that those she'enem rekuyim l'chka b'chukim letzad ma'aseim, he says, for whatever reason, a person somehow loses the right, for various reasons, to receive directly that which he needs. What does Hashem do? Also based on the Talmud that there needs to be kindness in the world. If a person, for whatever reason, is not deserving of whatever lot, or whatever portion was set aside for him, Hashem gives it to somebody else. But the only reason that other person has it is not for their own needs, but they're entrusted by God to hold on to this person's portion. And that's how he uses the word es ha'oni imach. He interprets it to mean es ha'oni, that which belongs to the oni, to the poor person, imach is with you. It's not talking about the poor person himself in the simple reading of the verse, es ha'oni imach, the poor person with you, is referring to the person. Here, says the Orach Chaim, means es ha'oni, that which belongs really, rightfully to the oni. Hashem has placed that his portion imach with you. And therefore, you should see to it that when needed, give him charity, when needed, give him a loan, and so on. It's a whole different outlook on assisting someone else who needs that help. I also want to say, this is also within the context over here, that the Das Zikanim, which is a compilation of some of the Rishonim, says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid something interesting. He says, why does it say im kesef, if money? He says, because there are times when the reason why it says if, even though, again, the simple, straightforward meaning means, is a mitzvah, you got to do it. He says, im kesef is also to teach us that there's a time when you don't have to give a loan. Says Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, the famous Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Says Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, right? If you ever been to Jerusalem, beautiful synagogue of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, that they whatever the word is. He says like this: there's a time when you don't have to give a loan. For example, he says, when a person takes loans and they don't pay back. Just mentioning that. Okay. Now let's bring it home and bring this discussion to its conclusion. And connect all of first verse and what we're reading over here. We asked in the beginning, why would the first mitzvah in the Torah be Shei Shanim, the mitzvah of a slave, of an Eved Ivri, of a Hebrew slave? We mentioned about the Chinese and their secret about work. So, the Torah goes on to say that if after 6 years, the slave says, I want to stay, I like my master, I want to stay on. And what do? We go ahead and we drill his ear. Why do we drill his ear? Because the ear that heard at the 10 Commandments, which is why, another reason why this mitzvah is told right after the 10 Commandments heard, Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodim, that God says that the B'nai Yisrael are my servants, and he goes ahead and he becomes a servant to a servant. That's why he needs to have some ear pulling, so to speak. In other words, like this. This is all interconnected with the mitzvah of Shabbos, which is also in this week's Torah portion. Shabbat. 6 days you shall work, on the 7th day you have to rest. 6 years you should work as a servant, on the 7th year you go out of freedom. You need to work sometimes because you've reached a situation that you have to provide and things are desperate. But just like you need to know when to work, you have to know when to stop working. That message is as relevant today as ever. The Rebbe points out that how do you know? What's the barometer? In other words, there's a literal servant, slave market, and then there is, internally, which is more discussed usually around Pesach time, Passover time. There's internal enslavement. So, talking about these two ideas, money and kesef talva, what should you do with excess money, and the desire to earn. Today, enslavement, for the most part, we don't have work in this typical sense of physical labor. Today, we have more sort of refined type of work. But today, the enslavement is to know when work stops, as much that's as important as knowing when work begins. There's a time for work. There's a time for focusing on work. earning a livelihood for your family, and there's equally, and maybe more importantly, even for the success of your work, to know when work has to stop. And if you don't have that, that might be a sign that you're an Ebed Ivri. And even after 6 years, you say, I want to remain with my master. In other words, you never know when to stop. Then the question is, are you now a slave in the modern sense? Kisik Ebed Ivri. That's why this is the first mitzvah after God gives us the Torah. Because God giving us the Torah is about true freedom. True freedom is about knowing what our purpose in life is. What are we working for? What are we making a living for? Is it become something as a goal unto itself, and we could never get away from that? And the Rebbe says something beautiful and practical. He says, how do you know? One of the ways of knowing if you're a slave to your job, you're a slave to the desire to make money, is if you couldn't stop on Shabbat. Ubashvius, and on the 6th year or 6th day, Yeitzei lachov shichino, you have to go out and you have to, and you're free. You're free. Shabbat is not just a religious thing. It's that too. Shabbat is not just something for a Sabbath observing individual. Shabbat is such a key barometer. If you are a free person, are you free, or are you a modern slave? I could tell you on a personal level, yeah, rabbinics, you, to some extent, you still work on Shabbat, the job. But the fact that the technology is shut down and I'm able to dedicate the day to Torah study, to prayer, to family. We had, thank God, a beautiful sort of group of guests around our home on Shabbat, on Friday night, with great discussion and questions and answers. It just doesn't happen during the week because we're distracted and we're busy and busy with good things and so on. Shabbat is wonderful. It's so uplifting. It's so liberating. So the Parsha is telling us that true freedom, if you could part with the hard-earned money and you could help somebody else, im kesef, you have extra money, talva, that tells you that the money that you're working so hard, you're not a slave to that money because you could do good things with it. And number two, the fact that Ubashviz, on the 7th day, you could shut it all down, that is evidence that you are not a slave, that you're not enslaved to the job, the technology, whatever it might be. Ubashviz Yetze Kisik Nevedivri is a mitzvah that is the first mitzvah in after the 10 Commandments, because being internally free is true freedom. And that's why we're also, when we're coming in, or now we're entering into the month of Adar, is the month of true joy. If you could attain that belief, that connection, then you are free. I heard a story, talk about having trust in Hashem and knowing that your efforts are like plowing the field, but ultimately the blessing comes from above. It's the rain that makes it grow. When you could live that way, then you could disconnect and have internal freedom. So I heard a story from a Melech Biramin. I like to listen to him. I listen to him every so often. So he mentioned the story, and I believe he heard this firsthand from the individual. It's a pretty fantastical story. So he says like this. He says that there was a fellow in Israel who was in very, very serious debt. I think Israel in general, the way society lives, there's a high level of debt because everybody lives on credit. You pay your bills, the bank extends you credit, you pay your bills, you pay back. But apparently this guy got in over his head. And through some connections in the United States, he was told that in Detroit, someone set up an appointment for him. There's a bank in Detroit that was ready to give him a loan. I don't remember the details how that happened, but whatever it is, and he desperately needed this loan for basic survival. So decides to travel to Detroit. He has a meeting set up with the bank manager for 4:30. Could be he was a U.S. citizen as well. Anyway, 4 o'clock, he decides to go to the local synagogue not far from the bank to get a minyan for the afternoon prayers for mincha. And he comes into the synagogue, and it's, instead of being sort of a bustling synagogue where there's a bunch of a minyan going on, 10 people that you need to daven the mincha with, if you want to daven with a minyan, which has a special power, they're trickling in, one person, two people, and to his horror, he is the 10th. And he wants to daven because he cannot be late to this most important meeting. Imagine you come late to a meeting where you're trying to get a loan, and the guy will tell you, the bank manager says, you can't even show up to the meeting on time. I don't want to talk to you. You're not a trustworthy person. But they beg him to stay because he is the 10th. He has a soft heart. He doesn't want to break up the minyan. He says, fine. But he says, right after the Amida, for those who know a little bit the intricacies of minyan, right after the Amida, I'm dashing out. But the guy leading the synagogue says, please stay till after the last Kaddish, because today I have a chiyuv. Today I have my yahrzeit, my mother or father, and I really want to say Kaddish. And I want to say every Kaddish, and I need a minyan to answer Amen. And he's begging him, and he says, I gotta beg him. And he's begging him. So he acquiesces. He says, okay. So Hashem's hands, I can't let this person down. I traveled from Israel, but I can't let this person down. And he stays, and right after the minyan, he dashes out there, and he runs with everything he's got to, to get to the bank late. And whatever it'll be, will be. And he gets to the bank, and he's all stressed out, he's nervous, but he sees that Hashem answered his prayers. Why? He says his mitzvah was rewarded. Because when he gets to the bank, they excuse themselves and say, sorry, something happened. Bank manager is usually not late, but today he got stuck, he got busy with something, whatever it is, and he's going to be a couple of moments late. Look, I did a mitzvah, and Hashem rewarded me. Very happy. But Reb Melech ends the story. He says it didn't end with there. He's sitting there, he's waiting for the bank manager. Who walks in? The bank manager walks in. Who is the bank manager? The bank manager was the fellow at the synagogue that was the chazan that asked him to stay till after the last Kaddish for his parents, one of his parents' yahrzeit, so he could say Kaddish. Needless to say that the fellow saw that this guy is such a kind person, and he waited and gave everything up just to help a fellow. He says, no problem, I'll help you with the loan. So, do not be a slave. Be free. Be joyous by recognizing there's a higher power. There's a greater power. Life is not controlled ultimately by us. We put in the efforts that we need to put in. We do what's need to be done. But there's a higher power. Doing what's right will bring about the right results, and you'll be able to be a happy person, peaceful person, a family person. Let's enjoy the month of Adar. Get ready for Purim. Everybody have a fantastic week. Thank you for listening. Share these words of Torah.